Hey, welcome to the Science of Peace podcast. This is very exciting. I'm your host, Yogi Chris, PhD, founder of Ninth Limb Yoga. And that's what sponsors all my podcasts is Ninth Limb Yoga. This is the brand of yoga themed around communication. That being the ninth limb that I got from my original yoga teacher, Doug Swenson. But I have another living master, very experienced, decades and decades of yoga experience. And he's connected to yoga masters as well. So I'm sure he's going to be humble and be like, I'm not a master. I know masters. I know real living masters. He's a master to me and I'm a master to others. And it's a lineage, you know, so you get the information, what works, where you can get it. And Yogi Robert Boustany is here with me today. He's the founder of Pralaya Yoga in Houston, Texas. He was a professional nuclear physicist for, I believe, and he'll correct me on any of the credentials if I say them wrong, nuclear physicist for over like 35, 36 years, you know, touring the country, doing conferences, talking that intellectual science stuff. And, you know, I love that. And we can curse here. I don't know if you guys like me cursing, but we can curse here on my podcast. So I love that shit. And, you know, I have a PhD in engineering, but I wouldn't consider myself in this. It's different engineering from being a nuclear physicist. And so, but then he, you know, was practicing Ashtanga for decades. Ashtanga Vinyasa is a very rigorous yoga practice. I'm sure we'll talk about it. Very deep roots in, you know, the yoga lineage all the way back to India and up into the Himalayas. And then recently, in the last 8 to 10 years, he's been connected to some authentic, real-life Himalayan yogis, ancient systems that he's the first Westerner that they're teaching this stuff to. Maybe they've took on some other students since then, but it goes really deep. And I was very impressed with Robert's ability to activate muscles, to describe how to separate the joints in the body, and especially the fascia and the energetics of what's happening. I had some incredible experiences teaching basic breathing meditation, or what he teaches in his classes. I've only taken like 6 to 8 classes with you, Robert, but it's transformed my practice. Almost every day I practice the things that you have shown me in group class. And so it's my real honor to have you here today. Thank you for arriving. How are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing fine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent.
The future of the world is for us to all get together and take care of each other and share whatever knowledge we have, because whatever our background is, we can certainly share some deep insight from whatever we've experienced, certainly in this time. So yeah, it's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Hey, you're welcome. And speaking of this time, obviously we're, you know, on coronavirus lockdown, you know, the world has shut down for these flu-like symptoms. And, you know, there's a lot of, not going into like the politics of it, so to speak, but where has yoga or the yoga practice, or where have your practices, like, has that changed? I mean, it's interesting because like I already felt like kind of a hermit. And so the lockdown doesn't seem to affect me that much. My business is online, but, you know, so what have you noticed about these times? Like, what can you say about these times for people?
Well, I'm kind of in the same position as you are. You know, I get up in the morning, and when I was younger, I was doing a couple hours of physical practices, and then I do pranayama and meditation. But at a certain point, when you work your body for a long enough period of time, you find that you can sit down and do meditation and pranayama, and you generate plenty of energy even without the physical practice. So for my students, we work on physically, how do you clear out the stresses in your body? Because you have a human being, and that's what I've seen with people. You have human beings that are anxious about all sorts of things, obviously finances, health, and so on. Even though, and you see some actually very bad science out there, if I can say that kind of thing. There's some very bad science out there.
About what?
About the COVID virus. So one of the things that is true is nobody was testing for antibodies. So they look at how lethal this virus is, and they put the number of people that are dying, but they only put down the number of people that were tested positive for the virus. They don't have any indication of how many people caught the virus, had little or no response to it. Immunology is great. So suddenly the death rate looks like a much higher percentage than it actually is. So it's really bad science.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for spelling that out for us.
So there's a lot of tension in the world.
Oh, yeah.
And the basis for that tension is founded on listening to so-called experts, but even the experts are not having all the accurate facts.
Yeah, there's a lot of conspiracies around it, and so I always recommend watch those conspiracy videos, because if they ring true, why they would be cooking the numbers, or I mean, I'm sure the high scientists with their multiple PhDs, they know if they did it wrong. I was myself like a PhD, right, in environmental science, and I got disillusioned by it because I found so many contradictions in the global warming models and deforestation and species loss and soil loss. I found contradictions when I presented that to my advisor and I was looking for funding. It was very discouraged to counter the narrative of what was happening in the world. And I became a little discouraged. I went ahead and finished my PhD because I really wanted those 3 letters. But, so it's definitely, there's an agenda to push forward a certain story that is, arousing, angst and fear and anger and these things. What can you tell us about, something I've heard recently about fear closing down the pineal gland, that the intuition and the third eye, so to speak, or if you would even call the pineal gland the third eye, and how fear and angst, how these things must be conquered to really develop or open up intuition.
Absolutely, and we can put it in really simple terms without going into a lot of science. The amount of noise you have in your nervous system allows you only to sense things which are louder than the noise. Wow. So when your nervous system is, in disarray and there's all this noise and worry and concern, then what ends up happening is you won't be able to sense subtleties. And when you can't sense subtleties, body thinks, oh, it's, like historically, you're sitting in your cave eating a veggie burger and, a saber-toothed tiger comes in. Well, and suddenly there's this huge reaction that occurs. And what does it do? It shuts down your digestion. Now, eyes are open, you're reacting, blood's pumping. It's just a survival situation. This is not long-term survival. You can exist by reacting very strongly. If you're reacting very strongly in a given situation, it's fight or flight. I need to fight this. I need to shut down my digestion. I need to shut down my immune system. I need to move the blood out of my skin so in case I get cut. But it's not that kind of situation. I mean, people talk about the virus being alive. No, it's a macromolecule. It's a giant molecule. It's not alive. It's not going to attack you in some particular way. Yeah. So it becomes the whole idea of the reaction. The reaction reduces your immunity. Doesn't help.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole comment of herd immunity as well. If there have been pandemics every year because there's some kind of flu that comes almost every year.
Sure.
And so this is not the first time. It's called a pandemic right now, but there's always flu virus around. So yeah, there have been pandemics for many years.
Yeah.
It just got no publicity.
Yeah, man, I hadn't put that together, that the fear would lower the immune system. I already knew that. I just hadn't put those things together. And it's like, because there's a lot of theories about, this was a population control device, basically trying to induce like some kind of mass genocide or whatever. It was intervened on by the government, and now it's being used for all sorts of other things. I won't go into the conspiracy theories because it's disturbing, actually. It's really scary what's actually happening in the world. There's a lot of evil in the world, and we're here. I remember a man who's he's dead now because he was a friend of mine, but he said to me once, I did a yoga retreat at his martial arts center, and he said to me once something like, the world is held up by the prayers of the Himalayan yogis, something like that. Something like the yoga masters and the martial arts masters of the mountains from the East are basically holding up the world with their prayers. Something like that. He said it way better than that, but.
And I've heard that from Himalayan masters as well. They said this world would not exist if we did not exist. But I mean, it may seem a little sensational, but I know my first yoga teacher, who's in her 90s at this point, Billy Galnick,
Wow.
had gone to the Himalayas, and she met a yogi in Rishikesh by the name of Tadwala Baba. And Tadwala Baba looked to be in his like maybe late 30s, early 40s. And yet he was 84, 85 years old. And he had these long dreadlocks dragging down to the ground. He told her, I mean, this is kind of interesting conversation. People don't have to believe it or not. It's fine. But she went from Houston, Texas to Rishikesh, India, was guided there by a monk, and went into this cave. And this Himalayan yogi said, I brought you to me. I've been watching you. And you will be the first woman to teach yoga to Indian women in India. And 3 weeks later, that came true. She was talking to another yogi, and they had some big conference, and he said, the women are not usually taught yoga. Would you please teach the women here today at this conference? Of course, there were lots and lots of people. Would you teach them some yoga? And she did. And that was the beginning. And here's this Himalayan master who's in a cave. He would come out once a day to go bathe in the Ganges, answer questions for an hour, and then go back in meditation. And her comment to me is like, I would go into this cave, and just the energy was so intense that I would immediately start going into meditation just to be in the presence of that energy. And we know whatever energy we're around has a definite effect on us. You have individuals at some kind of gathering. Could be a party, could be a meeting, could be whatever it is. And you can feel what's going on with other people.
Yeah.
So the energy you bring into the world has an effect on the world. And if more and more of us go to a very peaceful state, we have an effect on the state of the world.
For sure. Yeah. I had realized that as I removed the violence within me. I love, one of the things I loved so much about the personal yoga practice was it was an expression, it seemed, of the violence that I had in me. I was taking it out of my body, and in the peace and solace and the solitude of my home where I was practicing, it became very apparent when I was hurting myself or beating myself up. And so it made me naturally, as I had less tension, I was calmer, but it made me more sensitive to that anger when it was coming up in me. And so like one of the questions here we have already from one of my students, DC, he's in Albania. And he asked, does Robert practice communication like he practices yoga? And I'll hand that over to you in a second, but it was, I started to see that my communication, what came before my communication was my attitude, and came before my attitude was like my mood. And what came before my mood was a result of my subconscious. And I was really working and kneading like bread. I was kneading my subconscious with my posture practice. And, so I was having a downstream effect on my communication in that way. So how would you answer that question? DC's asking you, Robert, do you practice communication like you practice yoga? Is that a thing for you?
Yes, absolutely. And we should understand that our internal communication, you have two things that will influence how you might speak. You can have whatever is going on in your heart. And having done meditation for a long time, what do I find? I find that below the emotional clouds of the heart is this beautiful space of love. And so the mouth is midway between the brain and the heart. And so you can either download from the knowledge of the brain, could be the anterior portions of the brain, cognitive brain. One of my favorite comments about that is that there was an old book on the brain, and in the frontal area of the brain, they had marked it as there was a place where there was thought, and there was another place in the front that was called elaboration on thought. Well, if you're elaborating on thought, well, then you can go in any direction. There's no telling what you'll come up with. So communication is influenced by your emotional state, and communication is influenced by where you're operating in your brain. If you're in Ajna chakra and you come to the central section of the brain, that's the primitive brain. It's like reptile. So reptile lying on a rock in the sun, very quiet, maybe hasn't eaten in a month, and just waiting for the right time to respond at that particular point. You just wait. So there has to be this patience and trust in any given situation. So as I'm communicating with someone, what are we trying to get to? Is it a collaborative thing? Or is it combative, where you're trying to push some point, like they have the US Department of Misinformation? It's a real thing. It exists. Now, why would you need that? Well, to influence however you influence. But the major thing is communication is a reduction of uncertainty. And if you want to understand what's going on with someone, and they're a living being, they have soul, that means they have the possibility of channeling something from the source of all life. And so even if you don't agree with them, listen to what they're saying, understand what they're saying. Because if you don't understand what they're saying, or it just becomes a combative thing, if it doesn't come from a place of trying to understand each other, taking the time and having enough humility to understand what the other person's saying, even if they don't have, I've met people, very young people, maybe not a lot of education, incredibly brilliant. So you never know. Yeah, I'm going a long way, but anytime you ask me a question, it can go a long way. Pralaya, the great Indian sage, some people know him as just Maharaji, but he said, if God can make a body for you, and this is not requiring that anyone that's an atheist is put aside. No, we accept everyone. Himalayan monks will accept everyone. You can have absolute belief in God and tremendous devotion. They have meditations for that. You can be absolute atheist. They have meditations that you can follow. They don't push aside anyone. Everyone is accepted to understand and find inside themselves what's true. So Pralaya said, if God can make a body for you, then couldn't God make a body and come and visit you? So whenever you look into the eyes of anyone, look very carefully, because you don't know who's there. And the clear understanding with communication is there has to be some patience and some consideration of the other individual. Otherwise, it becomes a war. And at that point, it's not cooperative, it's combative. At that point, you waste a lot of energy. If you get angry, particularly in communication, then what's going to happen? For every hour that you have that kind of anger, it's going to take you 4 hours to recover biologically from that. Is your sensitivity improving? No, not at that point. You've disturbed your internal system. And what did we say? In order to have clear perception, that's why you do yoga. You do yoga so you can have the clearest perception of whatever it is that you're observing. And if your internal system is disturbed, then you can't sensitively understand what's going on. The value of someone who does therapeutic yoga is they're quiet enough inside of themselves so that when someone shows up in front of them, they're already feeling the state that person. Everyone can do this. We know this is true. You walk into a room, you can feel whether or not people are disturbed. You can feel something from the various individuals that are there. You can tell without saying a word, because communication, all the words are very, very tiny part of the meaning of the communication. People know this. Words are a very small percentage, less than 20%. Some people say less than 7% of communication. which is why there's such misunderstanding with just texting. To be in the physical presence of a person and feel what's going on there, and to suspend judgment long enough to make a connection. And where's the connection come from? The heart. How do you get to that connection with the heart? When the mind becomes very quiet. The Himalayan monks talk about this. This is really beautiful. They'll say, if I go into profound meditation, my guru, Swami Vidyadeshananda, what did he say? If I go into samadhi, then I can notice that any movement in the heart raises energy into the brain, and then a thought comes out from that. So to me, in my experience, meditation is taking repose in the heart, below the emotional clouds of the heart, in the source of your life. And when you get to that place, you become so engrossed with the beauty and the love that's there, with the patience and the caring that you feel there, that the mind becomes quiet. But the mind becomes quiet because the heart is quiet. And we know that when the heart is disturbed, that the mind becomes disturbed as well. And then what can you believe at that point?
Yeah, so it sounds like inexorably linked, that your ability to communicate and the stillness within you, maybe a person becomes very skilled at wording things. Maybe they become very tactical in how they position their body, or, you know, they can become very skilled and clever in how they communicate. But, you know, the stillness inside, you can't fake that. You can't fake stillness inside. There's no skill to pretend to be still inside. There's the pretending on the outside to be still inside, but you'll see how still that person is inside by how they can withstand the challenges of life, and how they face people, how they face combative people, how they face somebody that's disagreeing with them. And so that's how I'd say that was very deep. So I'd like to actually shift a little bit, because I promoted this also talking about how to expose new people to yoga. How, you know, that's very important. You have so much experience, and we can go deep, way deeper than I even know. Probably you could expand my depths. And going back a little bit to when you first, you know, someone like you, I'm already feeling it. I've only been practicing teaching yoga for like 8 or 9 years. You got over 40 years of teaching under your belt. How do you introduce yoga to some, like, they see that you can do incredible things. I think you can do incredible things. You're much more mobile than me, and you seem to be walking around healthy, and I'm like impressed by that. That's very appealing to me. And so someone else I know is going to be very impressed when they see what you can physically do, when they see or experience the stillness in you. They might get curious, and you ask them, have you ever done yoga before? And they say no. Where do you go from there? How do you cultivate their interest?
You have two kinds of people. You have people who are very emotional, and they're very sensitive to whatever's going on in the world. And then you have people who are very scientific, who are going to ask you all kinds of details about anatomy and physiology and whatever else. You have to prove things. So you have these two different kinds of mindsets, and you approach them a little bit differently, because one wants you to give them experiments and some kind of valid analytical approach. And the other person is just like, just give me the experience. So it's very different depending on what's going on. So I do two things. I'll say, okay, you're sitting nice and tall. It's like, if I collapse my chest and I'm looking like this, well, I could be very angry, or I could be very depressed, or I could be any of those kinds of things. So practically speaking, for any human being, what would you say? Well, if I'm sitting in this particular position where I'm more upright, what does it do? It takes pressure off my heart. So if heart's a given size, and as soon as I collapse my head down, I put pressure on the heart. So the heart goes from this size, let's say it's a really big heart, it goes from this size, and then it collapses down to that size. Now it's beating here instead of beating here. So I just reduce my energy. I've also reduced the amount of oxygen I can get in my lungs. So from a practical basis, I can say, if my spine is very straight, when my spine is very straight, I have uniform pressure from the front to the back of the spine. I'm not putting all the pressure on the disc. But if I'm collapsed over, for every inch, this is from Combative. There's 3-volume set on the joints, very scientific joints. Okay, discussion of joints. So Combative, what does Combative say? And I checked the calculations, correct calculation. The calculation is for every inch the head goes forward, it's 10.3 more pounds on the lower spine. So I'm collapsing my joints. All this tuck the tailbone under, tighten the abdomen. It's not lengthening your spine. But if you look at my abdomen, and I just kind of collapse down, you can see the folds in my shirt, so you see how that is. As I push my hands down, my abdomen gets longer. If I press my knees apart and you watch my abdomen, the abdomen gets longer. If I twist, now I'm having a corseting effect, and no one can say that. That's not core strength. You know, no one wants a shorter abdomen. So we start with that kind of analytical process, and then what happens? We have them sitting in that particular position, and as they begin to relax into that position, they feel different. And now the person from their heart, from their sensory sense of reality, you know, by the end of the class, everyone's sold on the fact that they're not trying to control their mind. They're just engrossed in the fact that they feel peaceful inside. And they don't necessarily have to understand why they're peaceful inside. They just know they are. And then they just keep doing it. It sells itself.
That was me. That was me. It sold itself. As soon as I experienced it, I tasted the nectar of yoga. I was hooked. I was like, this is for me. I can induce calmness and stillness in me, just methodically, just do step A, B, C, this yoga practice, and boom, pow, you're like delivered at this state of tranquility, and perception is so clear. And I want to ask you, because you opened a lot of threads, and anybody that's watching, of course, type out your questions at any time. We'll get to those.
Yeah, we got a great yoga teacher from Netherlands sitting there, Dorinda Farber.
So, welcome.
We have a few people.
Yeah, glad that you're on. So many really cool things that you just said. There's two things that came to mind was the idea of core strength, you know, just getting like really in the meat and potatoes of the hatha yoga practice. I hear this all the time, and I tell people, what do you think about this? I tell people to distinguish the core from the equator. A lot of people, I think, are training the equator like the equator of the earth versus the core of the earth is the center. So like psoas would be more of the core versus all the abdominal muscles are not core. They are the equator. They're the center of the torso, but they're not the core strength. What do you think about that?
Well, you have muscles that run vertically from the rib cage to the pelvis. If I shorten those muscles, I compress my spine. If, on the other hand, let's see if we can do this. If, on the other hand, as I'm sitting here, I place my hands down, maybe I put blocks under my hands. Well, now my spine is definitely longer.
Definitely.
For being in this particular position. And as I twist, okay, that's going to definitely increase core strength to do that kind of thing. Nobody wants a fatter waist. Everybody wants to get a thinner waist. How do you get a thinner waist? Make it longer. That's it.
Hey, that's true.
The whole idea of doing crunches is like ridiculous. I mean, it just completely goes against common sense physics.
Fair enough.
For core strength, what do? You want to lengthen the front of the body. So again, if I'm seated in this kind of position, I push my fingers down and I keep my hips down. So if I push too hard, what happens? Now my abdomen turns on, it lifts my hips. But if I push down and I allow my chest to come up as high as possible without lifting the hips, now I get this. Then when I press my knees apart, by pressing the knees apart, I get more length in the abdomen. So I've decompressed my spine. What gives me maximum strength in my legs? Maximum strength in my legs comes because the muscles are strong enough to let go and still protect themselves. So if I'm in some given position and I'm coming down into this kind of position. As I'm coming down, is this flexibility or strength? It's both. But why do I have flexibility? Because I have strength. How do I have strength? Well, if I have a pinched nerve in my spine, then my legs are not going to be strong. So what do I want to do to avoid a pinched nerve in my spine? Make the spine long. So everything is about making the spine longer. Front line of the body is always long. This is not going to give you inner peace. It will not do that. You have to lengthen the front line. And so what happens? You're around someone. And people feel it. You have an effect on the world when you walk around in a high energetic state. So really cool story. This is one of my common stories. I'm coming in from Europe, from doing teacher trainings there. Actually, they're in the studio. And I'm coming in from Europe, and I'm going through customs, and there's this customs official, great big muscular guy, and he's giving some young family a tough time for whatever, fingerprinting and doing all these things. He's not in a good mood. And I'm the next guy up. And I walked up to him, and I stood in front of his desk, and I was just in this very quiet state. Just to show you, people sense things. And I walked up in front of him, and he stood there, and he was very intense, and he saw me, and he put his head to the side, and he said, "I wish I could be that calm. Welcome home." So just your presence affects the world. You need to know that. If all of us can go to that quiet place, we can change the world. And it's always one person down, that's you, and one person to go, the next person that you can talk to that has an open heart. So you can change the world. We can do this collectively, and it will be better for all of us. Okay.
Yeah.
I go
man.
like this.
You're trancing me. DC's asking another question. It's very similar to, what you were going into. How did you meet Robert, and what did you benefit from his teachings? I'll hand it over to Robert, because I'll say what I learned from him, and then if you would, Robert, maybe you'll say what I need to learn next. What would be next in the path? Because you're further along. You'd be like, okay, the next steps. Everything you were just saying about separating the hips, I found tremendous release in the core muscles and the torso muscles, resetting my SI joint. It was very expansive around it seemed like, this is just my explaining of what it was. It seemed like it was very stimulating to the nerve endings and the horsetail endings of the spine down in my pelvis. I had a lot of bubbling up, tremendous energy that would just come up into my heart and into my head, a lot of warmth. I found ways to open my body that I was getting like a lot of the posture benefits of confident posture, upright, elongated, lengthening the front of the spine, the back of the spine, all areas of the spine, decompressing the discs. I got all those benefits that I would get from the practices that I had that were either generally were more rigorous. I had some very gentle practices, but they were sometimes too gentle. I'd like I want some activity or whatever. So your practices that I got from Robert had enough activity that it was like, I'm achieving some of the glory that I want, like some of the hollow back variations you showed me in the forearm balance. I discovered how to do that in the lotus posture, just the movements you were doing there, separating the knees and elongating the spine, but in a forearm balance. So I've had tremendous, it seems like a posture renovation, like my upper spine has opened, my pelvis is open, my hips have opened. I feel much more connected. I connected with what's happening in my body. I had not realized how much my outer hip muscles have atrophied, or they weren't as strong as I thought they were until I started applying your methods of separating knees and, all the cues and everything that you give me. And a couple meditations I've learned from you, but I think just mostly the understanding of what I'm doing with my fascia, and I've adopted some language and some posture positions that have opened my body tremendously. I mean, given that I had been stretching for 9 years already dedicated, I was an athlete before that, but like yoga stretches for like 9 years, I had tremendous gains, again, like a new gain in my mobility, immediately working Robert's systems. So what would be next for somebody like me that's worked like a lot of muscle activations? I have some athletes here, some of my people that are on here too. They're athletes, a lot of body awareness, I mean, if I say activate your psoas, they can basically activate their psoas. I say, you know, turn on serratus anterior. They can show me how to turn on serratus anterior. And it's like, what's next for people like us?
What I would say is, okay, you've got good muscle balance, good flexibility, good overall strength. And so the first level of strength is muscular strength and muscular balance so that the joints have longevity. Because as soon as the joints have uniform pressure over them, then your nervous system senses you're safe, you're okay, you're balanced. Now, the level of arousal, shall we say, in the nervous system quiets down, and suddenly you can be sensitive to much more subtle things. So the next level, just to begin to explain this, and I'll take it kind of from the beginning to where I'm at this point. So I used to do a lot of physical postures, and then I started noticing that if I did meditation, but I was very relaxed in my breathing, even when there was tremendous energetic, how should we say, there's tremendous intensity as I was doing my breathing practices, because you get these huge energies that start coming up the spine. And for most people, it would be very disturbing. Yeah. If you have any kind of emotional baggage that you're holding inside of yourself, you won't be able to tolerate the intensity of what's going on. So you have to learn to become very relaxed. All advanced pranayama is done totally relaxed, no matter how intense the internal energies are. It's always done totally relaxed. And if you're not doing it totally relaxed, you will not get to the highest levels of it. It won't happen. So people forcing Kapalabhati or some kind of forced breathing for long periods of time, you can't do that. It has to be relaxed, because your tension is shunning away some of the energy that could build up. Well, when the energy builds up, and I mean, this is something I typically do, I put people in my classes in this position, lift and lower. How is classically this done in Ashtanga? Well, you take the knees up and they hold that particular position. That's keeping everything short. But if I lift and lower, and I think the most I ever did in the class was 160, and I wasn't breathing hard at the end, I got warm. Why could I do that? Because the energetic pathways in my body are open, so it enables me to do that kind of thing. But someone young and strong may not be able to do that. They will start to get tired. Why? There are specific reasons, and this has not been explored in the West and needs to be explored. The next level, your bones are held together by trains of fascia. Tom Myers talks about this in Anatomy Trains. Your body is held together by trains of fascia, like bands. And in these bands, and this is going to be it's not going to be too long, but it'll be very specific. You'll be clear by the time I'm done what I'm talking about. So if I have a long band of fascia and I have several muscles in there, well, if a muscle turns on one side of the band, then the whole band tightens. Or if I turn on a muscle on the other side, the whole band tightens.
Totally.
So I can be in a given yoga position and say, oh, my hamstring's tight. Well, maybe it's not the hamstring. It may be something in a different location. I've seen it, someone saying, oh, my calf is tight. And what happened? He had an injured shoulder, and as soon as I adjusted the shoulder, his calf let go. And so this whole idea of stretching is an archaic idea. The science is not good. In fact, it's incorrect. So what do you have to do? You have to relax the muscle. So if I have a leg up, and as I'm pulling on this leg, what's holding my leg up? My arm is holding my leg up. Is it developing my quadricep? No. Unless my quadricep is developed, there's no way I can hold my leg up like this. Is that a forward bend? Yeah, that's a forward bend. Okay. So pulling on the leg is strengthening the arm. It's not strengthening the leg. So if I get a stretch in the back of my leg gets stronger. If I don't make the leg work, if I'm not lifting and lowering and the quadricep doesn't get strong, no amount of stretching the hamstring will strengthen the quadricep. And unless the quadricep is strong, the hamstring will not release. Neurologically, the hamstring has to release. But you guys have, you're at a level where you have plenty of strength, plenty of flexibility. Very impressive poses. I've seen them. Very good poses. What's the next level? You have the fascia holding the body together. Embedded in the fascia are acupuncture meridians. Embedded in the fascia is your emotional history, any traumatic history. It's embedded in the fascia. And I've seen this in classes where someone is doing a given pose, I release a certain amount of fascia and tears start coming down because they remember something when they were 5 years old. So your history is there in your body. What does the yogi do? How do you get to the energetic strength that I have at this particular point? You get to that energetic strength by taking the fascia. Look at my fingers. I've got 3 fingers. Middle finger long, little finger short. If I rotate, the tightest ones let go first. So when I come into a given pose, let's do that. If I come into some given pose, and as I'm here, twisting and releasing, I can get all these lines of fascia through my body to open up. So you're going to more and more advanced poses, as you might see in, the higher series of Ashtanga, but you don't have to do that in particular. You just need to understand, how do I release the tension out of the fascia? So slowly, by doing your practice on a daily basis, I take all of these neurological, well, it's not neurological, these obstructions in the fascia, which interfere with microcurrents running through the acupuncture meridians. Anyone who's had acupuncture knows they feel more relaxed, more energized after. Well, you can do yoga the same way. If I'm doing yoga, what am I doing? The fascia is piezoelectric. It generates microcurrents when you put stress on it. So when I twist, maybe inhale coming into this or exhale coming into this, okay? One phase of the breath, I'm in one position. Next phase of the breath, I'm in a different position. As I'm doing that, what am I doing? I stretch the fascia. What happens when I stretch the fascia? It generates microcurrents. What do the microcurrents do? The microcurrents begin to clear the energetic pathways through the body. Suddenly, I can sit down, and this is the point, this is the part of the punchline. When I can sit down because I've cleared my fascia, I can just sit here and breathe or walk, and I'm generating energy. There's no obstruction. There's no emotional obstruction inside. So the energy just flows. And so I begin to recharge my biological battery. So then suddenly I can lift and lower and do this for a long period of time because there's no obstruction inside. I've cleared the obstruction. I've become much more efficient internally. Now it goes to the next level. And I'll make this really sharp. Now we have to clear the energetic pathway through the spinal column.
Yeah.
You clear the energetic pathway through the spinal column, spinal cord level reflexes like a fear of snake or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay? That begins to burn up. That doesn't mean you're not aware that snake could be dangerous, but there's no emotional reaction when it occurs. So what happens? Now your physical, emotional, mental reactions are much quicker than the average person. Much quicker.
Yeah.
You become enhanced human being. And it has nothing to do with age, because in the Himalayas, they have the Hunzas. And you've got people in there, 100 years old playing with people that are 30 years old. And what do they say? Oh, he's in his rich years because he has wisdom and he has developed himself energetically as well. So the young people have respect for the older people.
I love that. I love that phrase of enhanced human being. And DC was asking, how did I find Yogi Robert? I had a previous teacher who had recommended Robert. He's doing rad stuff. I found myself in Houston, and so I wanted to go check out Robert's classes. And there were 2 experiences in particular. One was a breath meditation. I give this cue about dropping the tongue and letting go of the tongue and unsuctioning the teeth with the tongue, and so much with the tongue. I think there's so much tension in the tongue, and I think it's related a lot with thinking tension. And so I created a lot of this space, this kind of Katari Mudra that I was taught from David Garrigues. And I took this class with Robert. And so I was working Katari Mudra, and, Robert was talking about space in the palate and space in the throat. And then you navigated and used your language to help coax that space and told us, where to move that space, move the space in the palate, down the throat, move that space down deeper throat, down behind the heart. And I was somehow able to do it where I felt like this bubble of space that I was moving this space. And I literally, for the first time, experienced what I would organically call my heart space, that I didn't know that was like a thing. I thought it was like some nonsense. It's funny. So much of the stuff in this like yoga stuff, I was very critical of it originally, like the idea of your fascia or your muscles storing your emotions. I was like, it's nonsense. That's just like dismissed it. And then come to find out, oh, there's a thing called like, you can put space behind your heart or whatever. It feels like it. I don't know if that's actually what it is. And then this other thing, what you're talking about, spinal level reflexes and the heat released and this movement system that you have of separating the sitting bones. And I felt, and then you taught us, and I don't see, maybe we can have Robert back for a part 2, because I wanted to get into like bandhas and activating the diaphragm and things like that. And maybe we could do a part 2. Because I mean, we could go for hours. It's just people tend not to listen to podcasts if they're over like an hour. So I would recommend a part 2. Are you open to doing a part 2?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So we'll have Robert back. So I'll say this last piece. If anybody has any more questions, DC wrote another question. DC's getting in all the wisdom now, guys. So if you have a question, type it out or a comment. We got comments coming in on Instagram. With this spinal, like you did this thing with like a bandha, or you were talking about, because I was talking about how I was not able to disengage my pelvic floor. I was doing some movement you were showing us, and I was like, I felt like my pelvic floor was clenching and I couldn't let it go. And I asked you a question about it, and you kind of paused, redirected the class for like 5 or 10 minutes into like some breathing exercise. And it had to do with activating a section, which I learned that word from you and I'm now implementing it. You said activate a section or a segment of your psoas while you have an internal breath retention and basically pressurizing the lower abdomen. And then you can basically like kind of force that pressure into the bottom of this. I'm using my language now. This is not how you described it, but basically, pressurizing the bottom of the spine. And then I was feeling like the energy, like I was almost like when you squeeze like one end of a long balloon and the other end, like it's pressured. Like I felt like I was pressuring the bottom of my spine, and I felt heat moving up my spine. And I was very sensitive on the drive home, like abnormally sensitive. And it helped me with those explanations of enhancing the human and burning out.
Himalayan technique.
Uh-huh.
So what do? You want to move away from the emotional centers. And so what do? They start to breathe into the lower abdominal region. So if I'm breathing into the lower abdominal region and I distend my lower abdomen and increase pressure on the pelvic floor, to increase pressure on the pelvic floor, I have to distend my abdomen. Mm-hmm. But then to pull the diaphragm down more, I engage psoas. So the diaphragm's pull down more, now I can get more oxygen into my lungs.
Yes.
But I have also increased pressure on the pelvic floor. Now, where does the pressure go? The pressure begins to open the central canal of the spinal column. And
yes,
the spinal cord in classical Himalayan yoga is Sushumna Nadi. And so when I start getting oxygen to come up through the central canal, when I start to open the central canal of the spinal cord, I oxygenate the cerebrospinal fluid, and suddenly the brain becomes more perceptive from doing that. So there is this rebound effect, putting pressure on the pelvic floor, diaphragm's pushing above, I have a rebound effect on the pelvic floor, and I'm using the psoas to pull the diaphragm down to increase the pressure. And where does the pressure go? It begins to open the central canal of the spinal column. And that's the next level of yoga. Then you're getting into meditation at that point.
Yeah. Well, that's where we're going to go, I think, on the next episode. That's great. Absolutely. So we have wow, that really, I saw it now, and I realized how to use the psoas. I just realized how to use the psoas to pull my diaphragm down. So that's super cool. Looking forward to practicing that. So we're definitely going to do a part 2. Christine Conover, thank you, Robert. If Robert doesn't mind me asking, how has his yoga improved him in relation to women? That's going to, we could talk, maybe we save that for the next one, because I think that's going to relate with, or I don't know if you want to answer that. I think that's
I can do it.
Question.
it's improved me. So in order to have a relationship with someone else, you have to improve. So if I want to have an improved relationship with women, yes, I have to improve. So yes, it has improved.
Definitely.
And what happens in turn? Well, then the women improve me too.
Yeah, everyone's improving. Okay, Akash, this is we'll do this. This will be the last question. Akash, and Akash, he's a registered yoga teacher and influencer. He says, yeah, and Mo, we'll get into that question, Mo, in the next episode. Akash asks, what is the difference in your yoga practice, Robert, talking to you? What is the difference in your yoga practice from when you began up until today? I mean, that's a big question. It's been about 40, 50 years, but yeah. So how has the practice changed since you began, and how has your mindset changed? He's asking.
When I was young, I came in, I was very pure, and I had an internal knowledge of yoga. And so I was very quiet. And then I went through life and family and all these kinds of things. And there were all these disturbances that came in. And so now I'm becoming more childlike again, but not just childlike. Now I have all the knowledge of everything I went through in my life. One of my teachers told me, the reason you have to go through is because if you don't go through that kind of suffering, you can't teach anyone else. So you need to understand what they went through. Well, I understand what people have gone through. Vicariously, you don't have to experience everything. You know, I love my students because my students, I can learn things from them without having to go through the suffering they went through. So I love my students because they teach me too. Okay, I'm number one student. And I have the privilege. How did I get educated? My students educated me. So of course I love my students. What do I do as I go through life and my life ends? I pass everything on to my students, and then they become the master. You keep it alive. If you're a student, you keep it alive. Don't look to me to keep it alive. It's going to be your turn to get up there, and you do it yourself. And in all relations in the world, we have to understand that whatever we've gathered, you have to give back.
Yeah, totally. That's great.
So from that early time where I knew a certain amount, but I gained so much experience, and now all I'm doing is sharing whatever I learned and going back to my childhood state of purity and quiet. It's a very beautiful state, and I'm getting closer and closer to that. So it's nice.
Yeah, and thank you for being a guide to people like me. I can say thank you, at least for me, because yeah, I see so much of what lays ahead of me and opportunities to improve on what you've given me. And yeah, I'm very proud to be part of the lineage. And I think that would kind of be the theme for the next episode. So everybody, this is like, I'm winding it down now. If you liked this, definitely share it. If you're seeing it on Facebook or Instagram, share it. I'll post it on YouTube, the video. Share it, like it, comment. It'll go on iTunes also, the Science of Peace podcast. You can look it up on iTunes. We'll have Yogi Robert back. I'll have the links to find Pralaya Yoga in Houston. He does lots of online trainings around the world. He's available. And we'll have him back on talking about lineage, the pineal gland, meditation, and I'm sure that'll lead to a lot of other threads. If you have any comments after this, feel free to send me the message, and I can include it in the list of what we talk about in the next episode. I don't know when that will be. Maybe next Sunday. I'm traveling and teaching a seminar next weekend. I know you might find that hard to believe during the lockdown, but I am, and so probably not next Sunday, but maybe in 2 weeks, or we'll coordinate with Robert. And let's see, any other plugs? Robert, do you have anything you'd like to plug here as we wind down?
No, they can go to pralayayoga.com, and we have online classes. That's all we're doing right now.
That's right. Pralayayoga.com. That's PRALAYA.com. Pralaya. And that'll be in the description. Thank you 1,000, Yogi Robert. Thanks all the viewers. It was great to have a great audience, and we'll see you next time. Namaste.
Appreciate it.
You're welcome.